listeners, and welcome to the Offshore Wind Podcast. My name's Stewart Mullin, and I'm the Chief Industry Officer at the Global Wind Energy Council. And today we have another series of our special edition podcasts in relation to the Global Wind Report. And today we're speaking with NES Fircroft, and we have a couple of gentlemen from NES Fircroft. The first guest today is Jason Miao, who's the APAC Sales Director. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, Stewart. Nice to be on the show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Jason, for joining us. And then the next gentleman we have is Matthew Sandall, who's the Global Sales Director at NES Fircroft. Hey, Matthew.
Good morning, Stewart. Nice to meet you.
Great. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Jason, we're going to start with you. Can you give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself? How long have you been in the wind industry, and how long have you been working with NES Fircroft and in the talent space?
Yeah, thanks, Stewart. I joined NES in 2023, and I've been in this role for a year and a half. Prior to this, I'm a chemical engineer by trade, actually. I worked in multiple different oil projects in northern Alberta and grew my career in Middle East, seeing the boom and bust in the oil and gas industry for twice in a short period of time. And then essentially transitioned into APAC, start managing the sales activities across the region. We in the APAC region, we have 24 offices across, from South Korea all the way to New Zealand. So it's been a quite fascinating 18 months working in this role to see the different multi-industry and vectors, especially in the offshore wind space in North Asia and Australasia, which we're going to get on the topic later on. Thanks to invite me on the show.
Yeah, no worries. So as a chemical engineer, though, so you're actually working with chemicals. You actually are living the transition. I mean, you're the perfect person. That's who we're trying to attract back into the industry. So yeah, well done on that. Yeah, really interested to hear how you can transition across. And Matthew, what about yourself?
Hi, Stuart. Yeah, so I joined NES Fircroft in January of this year. So I'm pretty new to the business.
Okay.
I've worked across the kind of global employment scene for the past 8 or 9 years. Previously at kind of various EOR companies, selling and kind of working on solutions across the kind of full breadth of industries, to be honest with you, whether that be energy, renewables, construction, oil and gas, tech, you name it. And we did come across some wind projects throughout that time. So I've got a bit of experience there where we've kind of looked at kind of global employment solutions for kind of new parts of the world for some of these organizations. So there is some experience there. And then I joined NES in January because in a global role. So my role here now is kind of looking at kind of global employment solutions across all of our industries. And yeah, so far it's been really interesting. I think it's been a change, kind of focusing more on kind of this side of the world, and yeah, moving more away from tech and more into kind of more of these kind of complex onshore, offshore projects has been really interesting. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, then let's get into it. So the first thing that we see is, in our global wind report this year, we can see that it's been another record year for wind, which is a great thing. And I think we can all, as an industry, take a breath and celebrate the fact that we are actually growing as an industry, only very slightly this year, apparently, according to the latest figures. But the problem is that the bulk of that growth comes from China, so the markets are exceptionally unbalanced. And so one of the things that we are looking at, and it's particularly relevant for both you guys, is this idea of talent acquisition and making sure we have the right number of people in the right positions at the right time for the industries, as to create bottlenecks in the supply chain. So first of all, maybe Jason, if we go back to you with having had a few more years of experience, how have you seen the development of talent maybe in the APAC area, and where do you see some challenges maybe in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Stewart. Just on that, some interesting stats I think is worth to share. In 2023, the global offshore wind installation, over 58% are stopped in China, And then the followed by that was Netherlands about 18%, UK about 8%, Taiwan, which is 6%, and then scattered between all the other countries. So as we can see that the expertise and talents in Asia have a broad and maximum number of expertise or the talents sitting in that region. And then if we're looking at the salary space, compare South Korea, Taiwan, or Japan, China sits actually one of the lowest in the four main category of marine engineering, naval architect, and mechanical engineer, and the technician for hydrographers. It's an interesting stat because the market in China is so competitive, and you have increase of expertise but lower salary to drive the competition up. We have seen a lot of movement from the offshore space in Asia having the talent start moving. However, there's a key constraint about the Chinese talent with the language barrier and also the passport mobility from the regional perspective. We have not seen a massive movement from China to other locations. So that has been a very interesting development in the region in terms of the talent space.
But would you expect to see, I mean, given that the huge volumes of that China has installed relatively speaking, for the rest of the world, and the fact that the rest of the world actually has been pretty much installing the same amount of, particularly Europe. Europe's kind of been installing roughly the same amount of offshore wind year on year. As you mentioned, a couple of other markets have drop in or drop out over the course of the year, and the rest of the world is scattered. Would you expect to see those as new emerging markets come online? Would you actually expect to see that Chinese talent? Can they solve the mobility of passport issues, or in this geopolitics, would you expect to see that those positions are filled more by domestic crews?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Obviously, it's a long look into the future. It's based on my guess here.
Sure, of course.
Let's look into the South Korea market as whole. In 2024, we only have 23 gigawatts of the offshore wind planned, but in reality, there's only 150 megawatts being installed so far. The government had set a very big ambition with 72 gigawatts in 2030. That's a huge amount of growth, right? So based on the previous GWEC report, in order to achieve that, we're looking into having 770,000 of jobs, direct or indirectly, to be delivered this. That's a huge amount of number to draw into the region. But the challenge with our Asia geographic is each country have their own unique culture, working dynamic, and also their own language. English is the second language, and that's none of the people in the region are actually good at. So that cost of communication in such an intense, sensitive, and safety-oriented environment can be quite costly as well. Translators are not necessarily the solution to translate technical skills. And so you have this gap of people can work on similar type of projects, but you can't really solve it by purely language, by moving people around. Then you have the geopolitical nuance there as well, such as Taiwan and China. You can't really develop a Taiwan project using China steel, or vice versa, right? So you have this complex geopolitical friction there versus the language friction there that's causing this movement. So that's why we don't see a huge amount of talent of China exporting. However, I see as a China as a whole is always being very good with fabrication, modularization, that type of scope. I don't know if down the line China would be able to develop some sort of technology, or Western European developer would develop some technology. The offshore wind would come one piece. We just need to tow them into the final destination and then start reconnecting to do the installation part, rather than having more complex of a project development cycle at this stage. So we're excited to see where that future holds. Maybe that will solve some problem as the geographic and then geopolitical friction there I was just talking about.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting times ahead. And Matthew, from your perspective, I mean, I know that you've kind of just joined at the start of this year, but are you seeing, or maybe are there any trends that you're seeing from a global perspective that that need to be articulated here? And also, have you seen sort of like similar trends in some of the other areas that you've worked with before? And how can we maybe adopt some lessons learned from other sectors to address our needs?
Yeah. I think it's a good question, and I agree with Jason's points. I think what we've seen, I think some of this is kind of policymakers, right? They're keen to kind of talk about net zero and kind of implementation of onshore and offshore wind, but it then boils down to actually implementation of projects, right? And a willingness to actually do it. And we saw this with the EV market. There was a huge push for electric vehicles. All of a sudden, there was a big influx of skilled labour into Europe to kind of create, obviously, these motor vehicles, for example. Yep. But it was front of mind with policymakers, and they were keen to obviously implement and put a lot of money behind electric vehicles. We need to see that now, obviously, with wind. I think there's a lot of talk about projects, but I think the bottlenecks, a lot of it is down to actually fulfilling certain projects. And also that talent piece of, do you have the right talent to actually deliver on some of this stuff? It seems like in Asia, it's a focus, it's a priority. So in turn, you're seeing significant progress. I don't see necessarily seeing that in Europe, but if you look at other industries, it all boils down to policymakers and governments and that geopolitical thing that obviously Jason spoke about. Are they willing to put money where the mouth is, and are they willing to invest in those areas to the degree that's required to see progress and success? And I think that's maybe the challenge right now.
Yeah, of course, you're right. Yeah, policy and regulations always play a huge part, and there's a huge policy driver. And I mean, and of course, organisations like GWEC, we are an advocacy organisation, and so we talk to policymakers all the time and try to talk about making sure that there is, as you say, correct investments in the right area that's going to stimulate the growth that's needed. But I mean, in some ways we kind of are asking for the governments, asking the governments to give us the sort of like correct conditions. But I often wonder, if we don't get that government support, does that mean we have to go away, or are there other things or other levers that we can pull on that can actually maybe generate some of this things ourselves? Like, what can we do within our own sphere of influence without having to ask governments for support on things? Is there anything? I mean, I guess you guys must see this all the time with companies trying to work out, okay, if the support's not there, what can I do while we're waiting for the government action to catch up?
Yeah, I will take that one, Stewart, if I may.
Sure.
Just on the government part, immigration is one part, but from the past 5-10 years, we've seen Taiwan and Korea start developing offshore wind almost at the same space. But Taiwan has excelled, as I mentioned early on. It's more than 5 times of what Korea have developed in terms of capacity and installation. There's phase 2 and 3 already been developed by some core offshore developer like COP, Ørsted, and local Shinfox, etc. Versus Korea still a little bit stalled. One of the key feedback when I was attending some of those offshore conferences, the developer are complaining that the regulatory permitting process in Korea requires 7 to 10 different permits, versus in Taiwan, there's only 3. So the smaller regulation bodies have definitely enabled them to move things faster, to having the project to be FID'd. So I think that's one of the core regions where, as a GWEC association, can influence the government to remove some of the red tapes or streamline some of the permitting situation, can definitely push the industry a little bit forward as well.
Okay, if we're starting to look at some of the challenges that we see in the industry, I mean, permitting of course, is one, and that regulation is definitely one, and that the fact that we have, as you say, some countries that have 7 steps in a permitting process and others that can do the same thing with 3 steps. Of course, we need to get some harmonisation around that. But one of the, I guess, worries for the industry is the cost of labour and the cost of, is there a rising cost of labour, and are we going to find, you mentioned at the start, sort of like this possibility of cheaper labour from China starting to flow into other markets, and also, we see in some markets, I think like Japan, where there are like the capture laws in Japan are looking to make sure that there are local crews on the vessels, and that would require having sort of like, almost three crews on the vessels, one to do one of the experienced crews from somewhere around the world, a Japanese local crew, and an interpreter crew doing the same work, which is sort of adding volume cost to these projects. Is that what you're seeing on the ground, or is this actually coming to fruition in reality, and how are you seeing the development from a cost perspective?
We actually start seeing let's take Taiwan as example. We start seeing the phase 3 and development. A lot of developers start looking to transfer the skill expertise into the local talents, right? So after the first wave, a lot of European developers brought their people moving to Taiwan to start developing the project. There was a lack of talent. So something they did really well was set up a cooperation with government training facility to train the local talent in certain skills to advance them to understand how to work in offshore wind space. But after 2 rounds of the development in Taiwan right now, we start seeing some developers start looking into how they can brought some of the existing junior talent into a more senior region level, so that they can having the people to do more localization, having the better cost effective way of, rather than doing rotation, everyone's localized. There's a drive for looking to reduce the overall labor costs in such a direction. Although the mobility part, moving China to some part in Southeast Asia, is happening. We see a flux of Chinese developer going to the Philippines, Vietnam, or Malaysia in those locations. But each country is kind of unique in their own ways of how to drag down the cost from the talent space in that regards.
And Matthew, from your perspective, have you seen, you mentioned the EV example earlier in the show. Have you seen other industries where the cost of labour has been a challenge, and the mobility and increasing cost of labour, or the complexity around hiring, has added cost to the total cost of the products or projects?
I would say so. I think what you find is that there's further kind of employment options available in kind of global markets now. So it gives companies more kind of flexibility, I guess, in how they staff projects. Going back to Jason's point around rotations and utilising your own head office and actual staff over kind of hiring local nationals in market. I think that flexibility comes with the ability to be a bit more a bit better direction as to how you're going to staff a project. But then I think those staff costs add up. You're moving staff, you're seconding staff, you're adding local national staff, you're trying to find talent from global markets. It means that you're able to kind of really kind of sculpt and craft kind of how you staff a long-term project. But I think all those various elements can, if they're done in not necessarily in the wrong way, can end up adding cost, because there's a lot of moving parts to it, right? Mobility, immigration, head office staff, seconded staff, local national workers who you're then trying to upskill. I think there's a lot of various components there. It's a lot of spinning plates, and I think those spinning plates do come with an added cost in some instances.
And I know that NES Fircroft offer a service called the Employer of Record, or this EOR services. Is that right? You guys do that?
That's correct.
Do you want to put a few words around that, and maybe explain to our listeners how that works and how companies can get involved in that?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So Employer of Record is a solution that came out of the US in probably the 2014, 2015 as an official kind of termed employment solution. And it was put in place to enable companies of all shapes and sizes and industry verticals to be able to employ staff in new markets around the world where they have no entity infrastructure of their own. So it kind of was there for any organization. A lot of the kind of early companies that adopted it were kind of smaller companies who were looking to add sales staff in certain regions and markets and trying to expand their business internationally. What happened is, off the back of the pandemic, and also just through the natural growth of the solution, it's now a multi-billion-dollar solution that now covers all markets globally, and it's a lot more there's a lot more organisations that offer it now in this space as well. So essentially, any company with a global project has no need really to have their own entity in that new market. You can then employ staff through a third party compliantly, who are able to then provide relevant licensing, benefits, immigration and work permits, payroll, taxation, which is obviously a really important point on both the employer and employee side. And it just means that you've got a way to deliver projects in a new global market without the need to kind of set up bricks and mortar in a country, run your own payroll, go through all those kind of sometimes quite labor intensive steps to kind of set up in the first place. It means you can go into a new country, complete your project really compliantly, and at the end of the project, you can move your staff out onto the next project. It just provides a lot of kind of staffing flexibility. And it's now been adopted by, I'd say, companies in all industries at this point, whereas before, I think in its early infancy, it was kind of smaller tech businesses. One of the things that made it grow pretty significantly, well, hugely actually, was off the back of the pandemic, that kind of rise of remote working, work from anywhere policy, hybrid work policies kind of lent itself to employer of record. And I think now you see a lot of companies, especially with kind of large scale project based work in markets that they maybe haven't been to before or don't plan to go to again. There is an option here, which means you can kind of go in, as I said, be compliant, fulfill your project, and then walk away at the end and shake hands. So that's why it's there. So it's a pretty nifty solution and something that's kind of grown year on year.
Okay, does that? And pardon the if this is a stupid question, because but how does this sort of relate to like this fly in, fly out workers? Because I know that when I was again with MHI Vestas, we had these. We were based in Denmark and we were transferring service technicians or crew technicians to the UK projects sometimes, and so they'd fly in for a 2-week period and then fly out for a 2-week period. Does the employer of record help with that process, or is it something adjacent to that, or how does that sort of fit together?
It can do. It's a good question, Stuart. So it can do. It depends on obviously the project scope, the countries obviously host, and obviously where the location of the project is. There's definitely options, and we obviously help fulfill that as well, right? Looking at those rotations, that kind of mobility component that sits alongside EOR. The staff in the project is the fairly simplistic bit. It's then obviously the people movement in and out of countries, how you manage that from a tax standpoint, making sure people aren't overstaying in certain countries. There are options around kind of short-term kind of work permits and short-term business visas as well, but there is an employer record component that can support that as well. And then we would just help map out the worker flow, right? Who's coming in, who's going out, time spent in the country, etc., etc. But yes, it can help to support that for sure.
And Jason,
let me just add on that quickly, because I think increasingly some regions are getting more strict on the tax residency kind of requirement. After your stay for the country over a certain amount of time, you become tax residents. So there's a very fine line of boundary. When do you need to sponsor a local work permit rather than just come into a short-term business? Especially some insurers wouldn't even insure some of the contractors working on offshore projects unless you have a local work permit validated. So that complexity are not really achievable by the short-term rotation method, rather than having full-blown EOR solution by a contractor like us to provide that level of compliance and certainty in ensure of the HSE and also the local tax requirements on that piece.
Okay, thanks for having an explanation around, or a few words around those. I think it's going to be a challenging piece for a lot of companies to get their head around it. Particularly, we have various countries that are, that new markets come up all the time, and like when they're in their infancy and in the early days, either it be from a business development perspective when we're kind of exploring new markets, and or the first early days of projects. I think that there's a huge need for this sort of mobility in the workforce and this transfer of skills and what that looks like. But it sounds like NES Fircroft is in a good position to help companies out with that particular challenge.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the things is we are 100% compliant. We provide this platform for their sales employee to start testing the market. And if you really land some big projects or large scale work, and then we can help you to recruit, and then you can fully transfer your employee into a local entity once you see this is more of a permanent base. Without dealing with the local tax filing and then the corporate management and the legal, everything else associated with that. On top of that, we do provide the local assignment support, i.e., your employee needs support locally finding cell phone plan, or getting the lease signed up, or any issues that they may face as an expat in the local location. We have a fantastic team to support our clients to deliver this without additional cost. So you basically have a full-blown office support without actually setting up office, which is the beauty of it, that you are using the services.
One of the other things that GWEC has been spending a lot of time examining is this idea of local content requirements in each market. And as new markets come on board, every country wants to get economic value or generate economic value from their investment in offshore wind. And as an industry, I think in general, we've been pretty good at providing that economic value. And of course, one of the things that is really attractive for politicians is jobs and job creation, and particularly around the manufacturing sector. Do you guys see any increase in the number of manufacturing jobs in particular markets, or are you noticing more requests for your services in this particular area, or is it kind of mainly still in the white collar and maybe project execution and development jobs? Matthew, I'll start perhaps with you on a global basis, and then Jason, maybe from an APAC perspective.
Yeah, sure. I think from a manufacturing standpoint, I think what we found is that there are still a lot of quotas in place in regions. So while there is a need to bring staff into country, they're still trying to protect their local job market, right? So you may want to bring in a certain amount of workers to staff an international project who are expats, but there is a requirement then to obviously still add and employ a certain volume, and obviously it differs from country to country, a certain volume of local workers as well. Yep. So while there's no issue with global talent supporting a local project, they still want to find a way to ensure they're increasing their employment rates in host country. So I think it's a bit early for me to state, obviously, in relation to wind, obviously it's still fairly early in my tenure here at NES Fircroft, what that looks like within our business. But I think from historically speaking and from my career in this space, I think there's always that drive to push up employment rates for local nationals in their own jurisdiction, as well as bringing in international talent to support projects. And I think that will continue.
Yeah. And Jason, from the APAC perspective?
Yeah, I think from the APAC perspective, historically in North Asia and Southeast Asia has been the fabrication engine of the world, right? So we've seen waves of different type of talent coming to the fabrication yard to either develop FPSOs or offshore wind or large oil modules. The capability is definitely there, and we've start seeing more of a trend is relying on the local fabricators to do the fabrication piece and project management, but still hiring their own team to the QA/QC or the validation, the final inspection type of services that into the yard, so that they still have the final control. And those skills aren't really the traditional blue collar. It's more white collar around developing Western standard like international standards type of projects. So we have seen a flux of this peak in this kind of requirement, either the electrical transformers or the substations or structure steels. We've seen a lot of the area from all different verticals in requiring QA/QC type of work.
So also one of the challenges that we see from the Global Wind Energy Council perspective is we speak all of the time about attracting new talent into the industry and having broadening our pathways and making sure that there is room for people to get on board. But in reality, I think that, if you've been in the industry for a long time, what you tend to find is that, or at least maybe there's a few people that join every year, or a few more people that get added into the mix over the years, but it looks like people just move between companies. So like we all as an industry, the OEMs take from the other OEMs with experience, and then the developers take from other developers with experience, and people stay in the industry for a long time, but maybe their badge on their shirt changes from time to time. Do you guys see this, and what's the answer for poaching talent rather than poaching talent from each other? making the industry attractive enough to make sure that we're attracting new talent into the industry and giving that talent a chance to be skilled up and, I guess broadening the talent funnel.
I'm not sure, I mean, sorry for the bland response. I think it's too early for me to really identify kind of what that looks like in relation to how do you attract people to the industry. I mean, a lot of it's graduate training programs and things like that, right? But I don't know if my honest answer is I don't know if they exist in this space. I think that's how you kind of keep a steady stream of new talent kind of brought to your industry, right? But I don't know if that is something that is also available in the wind space. Is it something that happens? Is it a way to attract new stuff? I know I'm now asking you the question, but I think it's just due to my lack of knowledge, due to being new in this space. Is that the way to go?
Yeah, but I mean, you've come across from a different industry outside of wind. Correct. I mean, so what attracted you to, like, that the thing that attracted you and the job that it was for you? I mean, that NES didn't look to someone that had wind recruitment experience to do your role. They wanted someone outside of the industry, which is a great example, I guess, of where we all should be heading. But it's more in that sort of space where how do we actually make sure that people know that this is the sector that is welcoming of others and valuing those skill sets?
Yeah, I think for me, I think there was a growing appetite from NES, also other industry companies in this space, to kind of broaden their breadth of solutions, right? So for me joining NES, my background is obviously in employment, in immigration, in mobility. I think what you're seeing now is there's more and more organisations that have that more as a focus, right?
Yeah.
So NES Fircroft historically looks at workforce management, recruitment, contract perm, and now obviously there is this kind of solution side to the business as well. So we identified an opportunity, and then obviously now we're looking at how can we fulfil these business challenges that companies have. So I came across because I saw a huge opportunity, and I saw there was a need from our client base to look at how do they kind of staff these global projects. So yeah, that's kind of where I see it from my side and me being in this role. But yeah.
What about yourself, Jason, in terms of the transfer between companies rather than attracting people from outside of our nice little industry?
As I mentioned earlier, I'm from the traditional oil and gas, right?
Exactly.
So, I'm one of the example, slowly transitioning into the renewable offshore wind space. Still, in the recent couple of years, I've seen, my friends or network people, when we were really promoting the green energy or, save our planet, the Greenpeace, all the movement, there's large amount of people actually willing to take a pay cut to work in the offshore wind space or hydrogen or carbon capture type of space. But with the current political messaging from US or other parts that we see, the oil and gas is being massively promoted, and there's a lack of continuation of the offshore wind plant. Yep. The reality is all those people still have families to taking care of, right? They need to have income, they need to stay on the projects, and they can't sustain for long term just for the sake of saving the plants. End of the day, they need to look after the family and everything else. So some of the people essentially left to rejoin the oil and gas because the boom of the oil and gas in other regions, rather than stay in offshore space. But I think generally it's been broadly desired. People want to get into the offshore wind or renewables, but it's just lack of the pipeline for the continuation. So there's several layers of what we can do. I mean, we can vote and trying to have more promoting the renewable energy, and then also influencing the industry understand this is good for the broader future. So I really don't have an answer for that, but how we can keep the talent. But it's just end of the day is if there's enough pipeline, people understand the value of it from not just monetary type of value, there is going to be a natural attraction to grow the offshore wind space even further.
But do you think that the roadmap is clear enough for people outside of the industry to have that confidence to join the industry? I mean, we spoke, or we saw in the US that when Mr. Trump was re-elected, one of the things that he very quickly turned his focus to was offshore wind, and how he didn't want offshore wind to further offshore wind development, etc. I mean, does those sort of big political movements, do these things have an impact on the rest of the world when we hear things like that, where people go, maybe this isn't the industry that I want to join, or this is a bit too volatile, or are people still motivated by their values and still want to look to us regardless?
That's I think there's a little bit both,
Okay.
and also that has a period of expiration, right?
Yeah, right.
We can keep helping people to understand this is important. I think people have that core value, but with the media being so strong, with economical so turbulence by President Trump, it can cause certain imaging for the talent space to understand, well, maybe there's no more offshore wind after this. There's a surge of the oil and gas export. They need to focus on that. The company are certainly looking into those policies being made by the U.S. government, and then see where the money are more safe to be invested, right? So it's very tough and then turbulence, like the stock market of the U.S. right now, I guess. I cannot believe it's only been 4 months. Can't imagine
Really?
the next 3.5 years to go, honestly. So we'll see where the industry goes from today. Yeah.
Yeah, and Matthew, from a global perspective, are you seeing pretty much the same, or are there any sort of nuances that looking at the sort of macro level?
Yeah, I think going back to your point about obviously Trump's words, I think it's one of those where those words definitely resonate, right? People read the news, they watch the news, and that might be the only time they ever engage with onshore and offshore wind, right? So it's front and center by someone who's obviously talking about it quite negatively. So I think it needs a balance.
Yep.
It needs to be spoken about in more positive terms in another area to probably just counterbalance maybe the news they're reading that Donald Trump has got no intention of. I mean, I know it's just a US issue, or that's obviously him speaking on behalf of the US, but obviously the US carries obviously global repercussions as well. So I think it just needs more positive reinforcement, need to be spoken about in broader terms, I think. And that's probably the challenge right now, is how do you make it front and center and ensure that people are understanding the industry in more detail on a broader scale, right? Unless you've got some background or some knowledge or some industry insights, it needs to be something that's spoken about in more glowing terms than perhaps it is right now.
Yeah, and I guess that the offshore wind development cycles are, they can go, 5, 10, 12 years in some cases, like that's 3 political cycles in US political terms. If each term lasts 4 years, I mean, it's not necessarily that the person in power at the moment is going to be able to, stop or reduce in most cases we find that progress and inertia in the markets will, evolve to actually turbines being installed at some point. It might slow it down a little bit, but it never, or in the past, we haven't had any examples of where it's been killed completely. So hopefully we can, continue to chip away at these things. And also interesting about the US, when we look at where the footprints from the wind industry is, not necessarily offshore wind, but in the onshore wind space, there's a lot of Republican states that have, wind jobs in those states. So it's going to be interesting to see, once the dust settles on this, this rapid outburst of executive orders, once the dust settles and we start to get into the implementation phase, how much pushback there's going to be from other Republican states that that might have seen that there's been a bit too hasty, these actions, without thinking of the consequence. So, but anyway, hopefully that's something that can play out over time, and I guess that we'll all look forward to seeing what that looks like. Moving back to the idea of this, the roadmap in the future, what are some of the trends from this talent recruitment and talent acquisition side of things, where is there any trends emerging that you see would be a good counter to this?
Actually, we've started seeing more interesting that we are working more closely with our US clients, European clients. Yep. In the Asia Pacific region. We're seeing a flux of more European developers coming to Asia to develop the offshore wind or energy space. And then it seems like there's a stronger bond between the two continents to have more business transactions or, mobility, kind of people movement, rather than the traditionally was more US coming to Asia. So that has been a very interesting trend that I've seen from the Asia part, and also between North Asia like Japan, Korea, China to Southeast Asia. There's a large flux of the companies going to those regions to work on the projects in the Southeast Asia region as well. So that has been more than the other way around historically from the US or from UK.
Interesting. And from Matthew, from the global trends or global solutions?
I think even my short time here, I think what we have seen is more and more companies in the onshore offshore wind looking to not necessarily projects that are ready to go, as in they're finalized and started, but there's definitely more discussion around staffing options and pricing up staffing options. I think as they're kind of looking to fulfill projects or there's futures coming in the future, they want to be really clear, even at an early stage, as to how these projects will run from a mobility staffing need perspective. So I think even that is a positive sign. It doesn't mean there's stuff ongoing right now, but it means that there's discussions ongoing. And you see this in other industries, right? We see this sudden flurry of opportunity and discussion and pricing and how do we do this and how do we do that. And I think that's always lends itself to future success. And I think these early stage kind of more exploratory conversations is generally a good sign as to kind of how things should play out. It means there's options and opportunity, and they just want to make sure they've got their ducks in a row ahead of work that they either may win or is due to start, or maybe not until 2025 or 2026. But at this point, they're obviously putting in place kind of pricing and strategy, and some of the stuff that we can provide can really help support that at this early stage. So we are seeing more of that, which I don't think is a negative.
Really interesting. Thanks for that. We are coming to the end of the time for this recording. Before we wrap it up completely, I know that the Global Wind Report, each year it's downloaded and read by 50 to 60,000 people, and the Offshore Wind Podcast is also listened to by a lot of people that are looking to get into the wind industry or starting to think about getting into the wind industry. So both publications, both here and the Global Wind Report, are often sort of like one of the first starting points for people doing research into how to get into the wind sector. Do you guys at NES Fircroft have any pathway programs for people to get in? How do you actually work with people that are looking to transition into wind, or how should people get into the NES Fircroft universe?
I think you can always reach out to us through the website. We do have a job portal that's specific for different industries. We also regularly publish certain white paper about talent requirements and demands. You can always get in touch through there. And then we do, our marketing team is doing a great job of tracking the stuff and then basically link to the right recruitment expertise with the people who's interested in joining the space. So yeah, definitely come to our website and then look into our LinkedIn page, and also reach out to any one of us here as well.
Matthew, I can understand that NES are actually partnering with the Global Energy Skills to get some verified training providers to help the industry out. Can you say a little bit more about, or can you tell the listeners a little bit more about that partnership?
Of course, yeah. NES have just recently partnered with GES, obviously, as you mentioned, Global Energy Skills. The aim of it is to connect verified global training providers with professionals looking to kind of work in the industry and seek kind of industry certified learning. So we're going to connect candidates with training courses and help them transition into new roles and sectors, specifically in certain industries, but also in the wind industry as well. And you can find out more by going to our website. I think there should be something posted there. If not now, it will be in the very not so distant future.
So as always, we end up each Offshore Wind podcast with a reflection of something that might have caught our eye in the market of recent times. Whether it could be an announcement, it could be a trend, it could be anything. So Jason, if we start with you, has there been anything that's happened over the last week or so that has maybe caught your attention? As I said, doesn't have to necessarily be related to offshore wind. It could be anything.
Good question. I think I probably touched a little bit earlier on that we start seeing more European clients are coming to Asia. We see a flux of the more transactions happened between the two regions. And then we'll also start seeing a lot more QA/QC requirements from inspecting either the equipment or piping or different type projects or structures, steel fabrication, more of those kind of expertise being required into local space. I think that's a trend I've seen over the past little while.
Interesting. And from Matthew, from your side, is there anything that's caught your attention? I guess being new to the industry, I guess a lot of things are still new to you, but is there anything in particular that's caught your attention of recent times?
Yeah, I think from a UK standpoint, I thought it's quite interesting that obviously with the new government, I saw the onshore wind industry task force met up, must have been last week or the week before. And it's kind of a who's who of kind of the major players in the kind of onshore offshore space. Chaired by Ed Miliband, and I think it's important and really positive they're meeting. I think there needs to be more kind of action and progress that comes out of them. I don't want them to be meetings for the sake of meeting, but I do think it's really positive with the new government. They are obviously focusing this as part of their kind of push to net zero for 2050, and obviously their ambitions obviously increase wind productions quite significantly or double it by 2030. These are all positive signs. The fact they're talking and there's a discussion that's happening, I think makes sense. Going through the meeting minutes, doesn't look like there's a lot that necessarily came out of it, but I think it's a positive sign that everyone's sitting at the table and discussing this. It means that it's a priority of the new government, which is again must be a positive sign.
And Matthew or Jason, were any of you guys at the Wind Europe show last week or in early April?
No,
unfortunately not. Yeah, I wasn't.
No, because I mean, of course, GWEC is represented at these shows, and I went along to Copenhagen. I thought it was really interesting on day zero. So before Wind Europe kicked off, GWEC was invited to a roundtable with the World Bank Group, and the World Bank have been running this, or the IFC and ESMAP have been running this program around the, I guess, providing technical assistance and advice to government around how to increase the uptake of offshore wind. And a couple of years ago, they have released a key factors report that kind of outlines step by step what governments have to do to be able to work with offshore wind and how they should tackle this challenge of offshore wind and what are the key factors to success in dealing with offshore wind. And they actually have updated this. So I will, at the end of this show, apart from a link to the Global Wind Report launch, we will also, or the Global Wind Report rather, we'll also include a link to the updated Key Factors Report, which I think was a really interesting publication for the wind industry to get involved in. Anyway, look, that brings us to the conclusion of the show. So I would like to thank Jason Miao, the APAC Sales Director at NES Fircroft, and Matthew Sandall, the Global Sales Director for NES Fircroft. Thanks for joining us today and taking us through this incredibly interesting and incredibly challenging discussion around the talent acquisition and making sure that we have enough people in our pipeline to do the job in the future. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Stewart. Appreciate the time.
And listeners, just remember, if you've liked what you've heard today, please remember to rate and review the show. Always get in contact with us on the socials. We love to hear from you. If you have ideas for future episodes, please let us know. We are currently working on the season 6 editorial schedule, so jump on board and let us know. And catch you next time.